Okay, I am going to spend some time today talking about aggregate planning and master scheduling. So the first installation of this is really just why do we do it? What's kind of the overview of it? And so that's my plan. So I'm going to explain what aggregate planning is, how it's useful, and the variable decision makers have to work with in aggregate planning. And then we'll get into some strategies and that in a little bit. So aggregate planning is really that intermediate range capacity planning that typically covers 2 to 18 months of time. So short-term planning is today, this week, next week. Sometimes you're out a month, but you generally, for tactical daily planning, you don't usually go beyond that. So for that aggregate planning, you're really looking out kind of that mid-range time frame. When you start getting into scheduling, then you're looking at what am I doing this week? And so that gets down into like the nitty gritty. So this topic today kind of works together, and you will see how they connect, hopefully, as we go. It's useful for organizations that experience seasonal or other variations in demand, because if you don't have a cadence that in your business that is the same every month, month after month, without variation, it's a little bit difficult to see into that future. So being able to plan out and look at a year and a half, maybe even 2 years in advance, you can start to plan for the seasonality of your products. And you can say, in spring, this is when we're going to be busy. This is how we might have to plan for this. In the fall, we're going to be a little bit quieter, so we can maybe have a few more vacations going on. You can completely plan your entire business when you start to look out a little bit and think ahead what you need to do, which helps make your decisions today and tomorrow a little bit more effective because you know where you're going. So the goal is really to achieve a production plan that will effectively utilize the organization's resources to satisfy demand. So aggregate planning is something that you see primarily in manufacturing facilities and manufacturing plans, but it is something that you can kind of think about like at a higher level in really any kind of business. So let's say you have, let's say you're a florist. You can kind of think about the same thing in a florist shop, which sort of has a production, right? You have maybe flowers for a wedding that you have to put together, bouquets, things like that. So it can be applied in different areas, but the book will specifically look at it as from a production perspective. But you can think about this in a number of different ways as well. So this is the planning sequence. So we've talked a lot about business plans in other classes and generating your business plan. This is your operational strategy, your capacity. Your aggregate plan is really then looking at how are you going to have the operational capacity to do what your business plan wants to do. And then your master schedule looks at, okay, the specific production schedules for each thing that's coming. So it's very specific. So if you look at this, the corporate strategies go into the business plan, economic conditions, aggregate planning. Sorry, my mouse will do this. Aggregate planning also feeds into that. So we've done the business plan is established, and now we're looking at what is our operational capacity? What do we need to move forward? So why do organizations need to do aggregate planning? Well, it takes time, and I think it's really good to make sure that you're on the right course. So it's not really, if you think about your demand capacity planning and also your customer demand, so your demand forecasting and your demand capacity planning, those things are very difficult to do, and you're not very accurate, and you're not going to be any more accurate if you don't have an aggregate plan. So aggregate plans will get you a lot more accuracy on your forecasting, whether it be your capacity forecasting or your demand forecasting. So this is really going to help solidify what you're going to do, and those two things really play together very much. So there might be some adjustment back and forth in either direction. It also is connected to the budgeting process, and it can help synchronize the flow throughout the supply chain. So, like I said, everything is really integrated, and this is the class that I think that you start to see that. So understanding your plan can impact your supply chain, how much you're spending. So if you have a really good plan, you might not need to have as much inventory. Your equipment utilization, how many people you hire, I talked about vacations, things like that. So all of that goes into it, and ultimately customer satisfaction is your end goal. For aggregation, the plan must be in units of measurement that can be understood by the firm's non-operations personnel. So if you're giving this to a different department, you need other people to be able to understand what you're trying to tell them. So a lot of the language is in total number of units that you're going to produce per month, the dollar value of the output, the total output by the factory, and measures that relate to capacity such as labor hours. Those are things that people will understand in any department. If you start talking about piece count and things like that, that might not be something that people can relate a cost to or a head count to or anything like that. So the plan has to be in units of measurement that look like this. Most organizations use like a 3, 6, 9, 12-month forecast, and it will vary. So they'll do a full year, and then they'll do a 3-month forecast, and then they'll just keep adjusting. So forecasts are often updated periodically, because if you just do it once a year, so much can change, especially in the economy, that that's not something that you might really want to focus on. So this allows planners to take into account anything that is unexpected, fuel prices, things like that. All right, so I am going to stop with this video right here, and then we'll start talking about how we're going to deal with variation.